Father, I ask now that the words of my mouth and the meditation of all of our hearts would be acceptable in your sight. You alone are our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Please be seated and good morning. So in exactly 32 days from right now, the opening match of World Cup 2026 takes place. It'll be in Mexico City, Team Mexico versus Team South Africa. Partly this is confession. You need to know that the productivity of me is going to go down significantly. Every 4 years this happens, and it's just we have to get used to it at this point because I'm going to watch a lot of soccer this summer. Actually, I love watching the World Cup or any of these kind of global competitions because they actually put on display really different ways of playing soccer. Like each team, each nationality has their own way of going about this similar game. For example, Team Germany, if you watch Germany, they're not that fun to watch. They're very fit, they're very strong, they're very physical, and very efficient. It's a very efficient way of playing soccer, and they win a lot of games through their efficiency. The other end of the spectrum is Brazil. And Brazil is pretty certain that winning is nice, but winning beautifully is better. They do everything with flair. It's not enough to actually score. You have to do it with a little sizzle. And we had a Brazilian and a Honduran at the last service. They confirmed this for me, that it's very, very important that Brazil plays in this way. If you watch Team Spain, they have a specific style of play called tiki-taka. It's very short passes, lots of movement, lots of ball control. It's just interesting. You see all these different ways of playing the same sport. Team USA, their opening draw, they play 3 different countries. They play Paraguay, Australia, and Turkey. So 3 different continents, 3 totally different approaches to soccer. And I bring that up because if Team USA tries to play all 3 of those teams the same way, they're probably going to lose. Honestly, they're probably going to lose anyways. It's Easter. We can hope, right? We can still have hope for them. No, they're playing 3 different teams, 3 different styles of play, 3 different strategies needed. If they actually happen to win their group, they'll go on to the next round. They'll need new strategies again because they have a different opponent. You aren't just playing the game. You have an opponent that you're playing against with their own style and strategy. And we're going to jump into Acts 17 today. I know some of you thought we might have a Mother's Day sermon, but I tried that one time. I had to preach on Mother's Day in Texas, and it's the only sermon I've been cussed out afterwards, after preaching. I said some insensitive things, potentially, and a retired creative director from Hallmark was in the congregation and did not appreciate what I had to say about greeting cards. So we're going to leave you to honor mothers. I know the kids ministry, they're doing something cool. Father Bill is going to pray, but we're not going to try to go there in the sermon to avoid cursing and gnashing of teeth. We're going to instead look at Acts 17 today in the middle of Paul's second missionary journey. It was actually really fun about seeing Paul and his missionary journeys. It's kind of like when you watch the World Cup and you see all these different opponents and different styles of play, different approaches needed. Well, the different places Paul goes, he's encountering different religious ideas, different contexts, different strategies are needed as he proclaims the same gospel to them. He takes a slightly different approach wherever he is. And so last week we mainly saw where Paul is interacting with kind of 2 dominant ideas. One would be these strong Jewish religious leaders. And so he's starting with the scriptures. He's arguing from there. Jesus is the Messiah. In fact, it was always God's intention to have a Messiah who would die and rise again. Jesus died and rose again. Therefore, he's the Messiah. And he had a conflict. That was the strategy there for that opponent, if you will. It's also all against the backdrop of the power and economic engine of the Roman Empire. That's always there as one of his things he's factoring in. But here, he gets to Athens. And if one of the dominant kind of things Paul thought about was Jewish religious leaders. One of the things he thought about is the Roman Empire and their claims of power and what it meant to live a good life. Here he gets to Athens, Greece. And Athens, Greece was where the philosophers lived. It's where they had all these ways of thinking and entertainment and what it meant to actually think about ideas. And so here we're going to actually see, what does it look like when Paul lands in the middle of Athens? It's not just Jewish religious leaders that he's trying to figure out. It's not just the Roman Empire. It's these philosophies, these ways of living and thought and entertainment that he's going to actually be doing ministry in the midst of. This is a whole other ballgame. He's going to actually modify his approach in some really interesting ways. And I mainly want us to look at this today. One, I think Paul's speech, what he tells the Athenians, we have something to learn there just in what he says. Secondly, I hope it actually sparks some curiosity for us. If this is how Paul approached Athens, Greece, what would it look like for us to think about Athens, Georgia in some similar ways? And the mission and ministry that God calls us to do here. What are some of the points of both contact and commonality? What are things that we see are naturally places for common ground and discussion? And what are some places that we can say are clear points of conflict, where we are not on the same page? Because you see here, Paul in Athens, there's some places where he finds common ground. There's some places where he draws lines in the sand. And learning how he does this skillfully, I think is helpful for us. If you think about Athens, Georgia, and Athens, Greece, they're pretty similar, maybe. They're these places of intellect and of pleasure. They're these major cultural places where people gather. Athens, Greece was where the elites of their day gathered, the philosophers, those who wanted to think about things and be entertained. Lots of professor types would have been living in Athens, Greece there. Folks would have been seeking the good life like they go seek in downtown. Paul is summoned eventually to the Areopagus, Mars Hill, this place where they had this free exchange of ideas. He's not even street preaching in that moment. He's actually called in to actually talk about all these new views he's presenting. He's not on home turf anymore. He's there in the middle of the marketplace first and then Mars Hill. And so what does he do? What's his approach? I want us to look at that this morning. The first thing we'll see in Acts chapter 17 is that Paul will listen before he speaks. And he then generally speaks further to those who are listening. It's part of his missionary strategy. It tells us here in verse 16, now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, so again, he's waiting for Silas and Timothy because he got ran out of town in Berea. They smuggled him out, got him out quickly. He's waiting for his companions to join him. And he's learning, he's absorbing, he's walking around paying attention to what makes this city tick. It says, now while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. His spirit is provoked within him when he sees what the folks are actually worshiping, what they're going after, what they're seeking to be satisfied by. And we'll hear later some of the things he actually pulls out and uses as he presents the gospel to them. But it strikes me that he listens and observes. He pays attention. He's aware of where he is and how that might even change the kind of ministry he's doing. Before he's going to move to dialogue, but first, he's paying attention to this unique setting. And look at how he's doing it. He's walking through Athens, one of the most magnificent cities of the ancient world. It's full of architectural marvels, sights, sounds, things to experience. And he's not struck first by its beauty. He's not struck by the cool things you can do. He's struck by the idolatry. He's looking at this city through the lens of the Lord. And it's just worthwhile to ask when we walk around with our head up, do we think about how God sees the people we encounter? Do we think about how God experiences the things that are important here? Some of the things that are maybe contrary to his will, some of the things where you go, hey, I see what you're actually seeking. You think you're seeking that when you're seeking the Lord. Because as St. Augustine said, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. We need to imagine how the love and holiness of God would react to the things around us. To study our city, our town, study those we work with, those we're friends with, our neighbors. What makes them tick? What do they love? What do they love too much? What do they not love enough? What are they seeking? What's their vision of the good life? And how does that come in both common ground with the claims of Christianity and where there's some places that are probably going to be in conflict, just naturally. And they've got to be called to decision. Every city has its own unique shape, doesn't it? A few weeks ago, we had Dr. Ken Wilgus out from Texas to do a parenting seminar, and he was like, all right, tell me about Athens. And we were like, well, I'm trying to think through like what he knows. All right, it's not like suburban North Texas, because in suburban North Texas, everybody just carries a briefcase and it's like sales 24/7, even if you're in some other industry. I was like, but I know he went to University of Texas, so like Austin might be a point of resonance. You know, Austin is keep Austin weird, right? They want to be unique. I was like, hey, we're like Austin. We want to grow up and be Austin as a town. We don't have the business or the capital that they do, but we've got some of that quirk that we aspire to. That's a little bit of the flavor here. There's an old saying, it's attributed to Mark Twain, where he talks about these 3 cities in the U.S. that in Boston, they ask one question, what does he know? In New York, they ask, how much does he make? In Philadelphia, they ask, what family is he from? It's very insightful, right? One town, what are they paying attention to? Intellect. One town, the dollar. One town, family connections. What does that look like for our town? What does that look like for the people who you know and love? And what do they seek? What do they seek after? Different people, different cities have different idols. And they require different approaches, kind of like playing different soccer teams with different styles. It's still the same game, but there's a unique twist that's always happening with each one. And so here, what Paul's encountering is a little trickier, because Athens, Greece is this melting pot. When he gets there, the first thing he's doing is pretty familiar. He's in the synagogue. He's talking to these Jewish religious leaders. He's talking to God-fearing Gentiles. He's out in the marketplace. He's trying to see what's happening. And then we hear he's talking to these Epicurean philosophers and these Stoic philosophers, 2 different ways of thinking about the world. They actually say, hey, we want to hear more about what you're saying. And it's really interesting because they say, hey, this guy, he's weird. He's talking about some weird things we don't understand. He's talking about Jesus and the resurrection come. We want to hear some more about these things. And so they call him up to the Areopagus. And it says, all the Athenians and the foreigners who live there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. If you look to Athens, Greece, what they loved was novelty and entertaining rhetoric. So they call him there to the Areopagus, to Mars Hill. And I don't want you to think about like a classroom debate setting. The closest thing to this is maybe like a late night talk show. Like they want to talk to him, but kind of to like poke fun at him. And really they're not there to necessarily learn, they just want to be entertained. So they call him up, these different philosophical schools. And we're going to see that Paul will accept that. Great. If you'll listen, I'll come talk. Even if it's not ideal, even if it's not on my own terms or my home turf, if you'll listen, I'm there. I'll come and talk, which is pretty good for us to pay attention to. And if you look, he's going to actually shift from what we've seen earlier in chapter 17. Earlier, he really focused on Jesus as the Messiah. Jesus as the Messiah foretold by the Scriptures. Here, he's actually going to shift quite a bit. He's going to kind of zoom back and talk about really theism more as a concept, God as creator, and then what that means before he eventually kind of turns. And he'll pivot to call them to a point of decision and talk about the resurrection. So let's look at what he's doing here at Mars Hill. I don't even know that it's a sermon. It's more of a talk that he's giving. It says, so Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, again, that's Mars Hill, says, men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. So what's he do? He pays them a compliment. He starts by establishing rapport, establishing common ground. He says, "For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, 'To the unknown God.'" So he's paying attention to what's in their world, but he's paying attention about where an opportunity might exist. He finds this altar to an unknown God. He goes, "Even you realize there's something missing. You realize there's something you don't know yet. Great, let me share it with you. Let me make known to you what you know is unknown, because you know that you don't know something." That's a big start. You actually know there's something out there more to learn, and so Paul's going to make his proclamation. It says, I proclaim to you the God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. So he starts with, let's talk about God, and let's talk about God as creator. Let's talk about God not being dependent on us or dependent on anything we can make. We can't manipulate or domesticate God. He wants them to know that right from the get-go. He says, he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God in the hope that they might feel their way toward him and find him, that he is actually not far from each one of us. So again, he's establishing a little bit of common ground. He's letting them know that there's a God who's made everything, way better than the gods that they would have worshipped or known about or joked about in Athens. He lets them know that God has made all the peoples of the earth, that he's actually made us for a relationship with him, that we would seek after him, actually elevating our dignity, that he would want to know us in that way. And they're saying, and he's not that far from each of us. He establishes God as transcendent and great and mighty and near and wanting to know us. That's what he wants to extrapolate just from seeing you have an altar to an unknown God. You have a hunger and an awareness that something is missing. Let me proclaim it to you at the right time in the right way. He goes on to say in verse 28, "For in him we live and move and have our being, as even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring." Those are two quotes from two ancient poets. He's paying attention to the art that they've made, the poetry they've written, the questions that they're actually asking, and some of what they're already saying. And saying, can we find common ground there? He's actually being very gracious. He's complimenting them over and over here. Hey, you're very religious. You made this altar that was pretty good. Your poets even said these things that were pretty good. Let's just take one more step. You see what he's doing? He's actually trying to shrink how far they've got to go, how far they've got to cross to make this decision that he's going to call them to. And then here's where he starts to turn. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. Did you see the pivot he just made? He just pivoted from this place of common ground to calling them to a decision. Hey, you need to know that there's a judge of all the world. His name's Jesus. And he was actually appointed judge by being raised from the dead. What are you guys going to do with that? You have an altar to an unknown God? What's unknown is this one who has died and been raised to life, Jesus. How are you going to wrestle with him? What's going to happen there? And we get this idea that probably he doesn't even finish what he's saying. They probably just kind of cut him short. They run him out. It says here, when they heard of the resurrection of the dead, some mocked. That's the line he draws, and for some it's a line too far. It's a total non-starter. But others said, we will hear you again about this. So Paul went out from their midst, but some men joined him and believed, among whom also were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with him. It's interesting. It's this great chapter of mission where we see the strategy of Paul, how he even changes based on who he's talking to, but the fruit's not that great. We actually see different levels of success at every point in Acts 17, again, reminding us we're called to be faithful. To be faithful, to pay attention to those around us and proclaim the gospel faithfully and trust the Lord for the harvest and the fruit and ultimately the success. Here, by the way, the fact that the resurrection of the dead just threw them, that's not because, some people will say, hey, we know that dead people stayed dead, right? That's pretty logical. They didn't just know that, they almost had that tattooed on them in Athens, Greece. One of their famous kind of playwrights is Aeschylus. Anyone remember Aeschylus from classics? Anyone take a classics class at UGA or someone? Okay, a couple people. They looked at Aeschylus in Athens, Greece, like the way we look at Michael Stipe in Athens, Georgia. He's from here, he's famous, he did his thing, we pay attention to what he says. And in one of his plays, he writes about the founding of this place. Not just Athens, Greece, but Mars Hill. This very place where Paul is speaking, at the Areopagus. And there's this moment where you see this founding of this area, and you have Athena, this goddess, and you have Apollo. They dedicate this, and here's what they say: when the dust hath drained the blood of man, once he is slain, there is no return to life. Foundational for this place, Mars Hill, the Areopagus, is that the resurrection can't and doesn't and will never happen. And Paul goes straight for that, and that's what they wrestle with. Bishop N.T. Wright says resurrection is flatly ruled out according to the ground rules, and Paul firmly puts it back in. That's the fulcrum around which the world turns for Paul. And so some mock him, some say, we'll hear you later. It's interesting. It's not the success we would want for Paul. But he has some people take a step. And he's let them know the truth here. And again, I think maybe just a few quick lessons we can draw. I know that brunch always beckons on Mother's Day. But how do we think about our town? How do we think about the people we know and we love? What are the things that make them tick? What do they love? What can we observe? I think there's some real work and just curiosity of even just thinking in that way. I can imagine if Paul was here in Athens, what would he walk around and see? He might miss it. He might just walk around and be like, I see that you are dedicated to a little four-legged dog, because they're everywhere in town. That's probably not going to get very far, is it? But maybe he'll be like, hey, I came across a tree, and this tree said it owns itself. And let's talk about that, because one time there was this tree, and it was in the middle of history, and the one who claims ownership over everything was on that tree, and that one died for you because he loves you. And God raised him from the dead. And what are you going to do with him? He finds this kind of point of connection. Maybe he goes downtown. Maybe he's at the Georgia Theater or Nucci Space. He's like, hey, I see that you are creative. I see that you want to express truth and goodness and beauty. That's because you are made in God's image. And let me tell you what true goodness and truth and beauty, where they are to be found. Or maybe he goes to Sanford Stadium. And I don't know what he would do with that. I'm sure he would be provoked by the idols. I remember actually when I came here and we were going to start St. Thomas, folks you can't do a liturgical church in Athens. People don't want to wear clothes and do the same thing. And I was like, have you been to a game day? Everybody's wearing the same thing. Nobody's like, we should call the dogs differently this week. We called the dogs that way last week. No, we actually love ritual and pageantry and belonging and how those things knit us together. Or maybe you would go to one of these colleges here at UGA, and each one has its own thing, its own question they're seeking to answer about what is the good life, and what does it mean to seek and to find. I remember when I came back here to Athens, I met with two men, Bob Beckwith, who was the director of the Wesley Foundation when I was in college and still is now, and Bart Scarborough, who had been in charge of Greater Athens Young Life when I was in college, and when we came back, he was also still in charge. I was like, man, tell me, what's different here? It's been 15 years since I was in Athens. What do they think? What do they do? I just remember Bob in particular, Bob Beckwith. He said that there's been two main changes in the maybe 2.5 in the students since you were here. First, they're all way smarter. Because UGA got, it's a whole different, than when you went to school and most anybody could get in here. It's just a different type of student who is here. Second, there's just an absolute sea change in how people think about and talk about gender and sexuality. Third, and this was actually really perceptive. He goes, you're going to think that the downtown life and the Greeks, all that is the same. It's way different. He's 15, 20 years ago, the students we had, they would go out and they would seek love in all the wrong places, but because they were seeking and they were alive and they were excited and they were indulging in this kind of hedonism of college, which can't last very long. He goes, now these poor kids, man, they're coping. They're anxious. They're self-medicating with pleasure. If you miss what's changed, you're going to actually misdiagnose what's going on in the lives of these people and what they're seeking and how actually the gospel interacts with them. How the Lord has come to actually bring peace. How the Lord has come to say, come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. These common points of connection. You see how that works? I just encourage you, man, think about the people you know and love. It's often on a holiday weekend, you're going to actually be with people later today, maybe people you don't see all the time. Man, where are they coming from? What questions are they asking? What do they need to hear? What's a timely word that you can share with them? And I would just say maybe take this cue from Paul and focus on some of the basics. Paul focuses on there is a God. Idols are not real. Jesus has come and been raised from the dead, and you should place your faith in him. He doesn't actually go off into all kinds of speculative minor points, does he? He goes, if there's going to be a stumbling block, let it be the main thing. Not a minor thing or a weird us versus them or just I don't get you kind of a thing. That's what Paul's doing in his ministry. And then notice that he is at the same time wise and bold. He's not foolish, he's not a jerk, he's wise and he's bold. He's always looking around to figure out these points of connection, places where he can talk with someone, opportunities for the gospel. And what I found is sometimes if you're wired that way, you're going to always be finding common ground and never landing the plane to draw a line in the sand. Paul has this mixture of wisdom and boldness. He relates to them, he finds the common ground, and he calls them to decision. He lets them know the times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent. Because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to us all by raising him from the dead. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.